Thank you very much, Anna. I'm seeing the attendees coming in at high speed, so I think I'll let us get to a nice big number and then we'll kick things off. Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us this morning for this Eurochild webinar, Putting Children at the Heart of Europe's Economy. Now, today we're going to be talking about the economy of well-being. Why and how does it prioritise children? Of course, taking into account these unusual times we find ourselves in, and hopefully coming out of this COVID situation with children at the heart of our future. Now, we are going to be looking at particularly an economy of well-being, what we are calling childonomics that has been discussed. We're going to look at these issues. Now, I wanted a few little bits of housekeeping for you. I do want you to join along, coming in with your comments on social media using the hashtag Beyond GDP. We'll be keep an eye on that so that we can make this as interactive and interesting for everyone as possible. We're streaming live on Facebook. I hope everyone's aware of that. And of course, this event is being recorded. The Q&A function, which you can see on your screens if you're joining via Zoom, is going to be used to allow you to put questions to our panelists for the panel debate section of our event. My name is Jennifer Baker. I'm a Brussels journalist and I'll be moderating this session. My job will be to introduce you to your keynote speakers and then put your questions to our panelists in that panel debate a little bit later on. And with that, it is my very great pleasure to welcome our co-hosts. We have Hanna Heinonen, CEO of the Central Union for Child Welfare, the member organizations of Eurochild, and of course, Excellency Marie-Louise Calero-Preca, the president of Eurochild. Ladies, I will hand over to you to give your opening thoughts and set the stage for what we hope will be a really interesting and engaging next couple of hours. That's over to you then, Marie-Louise.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and I would like to welcome Your Excellency, Secretary General of OECD, Mr. Angel Gurria, Honorable Minister of Family Affairs and Social Services of Finland, Madam Krista Kiuru. Dear colleagues and friends, good morning to all of you. It is not usual for us not to meet physically. However, during these unprecedented times of social distancing, I am proud that Eurochild has managed, together with member organizations, to spite the situation and bring all of us together on this virtual platform to celebrate World Children's Day 2020 in a very meaningful way. We cannot underestimate the magnitude of the multiple crises that humanity is facing right now. The pandemic is far from being under control. Managing and overcoming its worst effects is not only a public health issue, it is undoubtedly also a very economic issue, a very political issue, and an extremely social worrisome concern. Beyond the pandemic, we are also facing a climate catastrophe due to the irreversible damage done to our environment. Faced with the scale and the urgency of these challenges, however, the pandemic is giving us and our governments and our authorities the opportunity to reflect, to develop the necessary strategies, and to build new policies. It is clear that the business as usual or the status quo approach is no longer an option. It is now the time to think outside the box and accelerate the necessary reforms. Many of the ideas and concepts that have been put on the margins for so long must now move into mainstream, and our strategies and plans given a new lease of life. Sustainability, thinking global and acting local, community engagement. These are all concepts and aspirations that have always been very relevant, but now we cannot afford not to bring them to life. We need to act now. We need to continue using these aspirations and putting them into life. We cannot simply continue using such aspirations as simple political slogans. Eurochild is convinced that respect for children's rights lies at the very heart of the solution of today's challenges. It is for this reason that Eurochild is organizing these high-level webinars during this week when we celebrate Universal Children's Day. Through these webinars, we choose to address children's rights from a different perspective every time. We have also chosen to ask children themselves to guide us in stimulating constructive discussions during these webinars. Webinar 1, which is being held today, will pose the question about what is an economy of well-being and why and how does it prioritize children. Webinar 2, being held tomorrow, will discuss the question of why is tackling child poverty a prerequisite to sustainably exit the crisis. And Webinar 3, which will close the series of breakfast webinars on World Children's Day itself, will indulge in the realm of why and how does protecting children's rights strengthen our democracies. For each webinar, we have also invited a national partner network to co-host with Eurochild. Our national partner networks bring together national organizations that work with and for children, and therefore they bring to the table the important grassroots perspectives. I'm also pleased to welcome our co-hosts for the webinars, who are the Central Union for Child Welfare of Finland for today's webinar, the Plataforma de Infancia of Spain to co-host tomorrow's webinar, and the National Network for Children of Bulgaria to co-host the third and last webinar on Friday. For this occasion, Eurochild is also launching its new report, Growing Up in Lockdown, Europe's Children in the Age of COVID-19, which provides a unique in-depth country-by-country assessment of the situation of children's rights and conditions in Europe. It also provides a set of recommendations to improve public policies, both on a short and long-term basis, to effectively support children and families. We are also delighted to organize today's webinar in partnership with OECD. I am particularly honored to welcome the Secretary General of OECD, His Excellency Angel Gurria, to open this first webinar by actually keynoting it. I have had the first-hand experience of the invaluable work that OECD does, even through its research to provide advocacy to governments and policymakers. I'm also particularly excited to hear of the establishment of a Center on Wellbeing, Inclusion, Sustainability, and Equal Opportunity, WISE, within OECD, and which, as I'm informed, will be launched next week. The Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. Angel Gurria, will be stimulating our discussion by addressing the question that we have identified for today's webinar, which is, what is an economy of well-being and why and how does it prioritize children? And without much further ado, I now give the floor to the Secretary General of OECD, His Excellency Angel Gurria. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marie-Louise, and Minister Krista Kuru, Jennifer, dear friends. It's a pleasure to be with you today. World Children's Day offers valuable moments for taking a look at what is important, taking a look at what is really meaningful, but also for taking stock of where we stand and then planning ahead, taking a look at what stands in the way, and then planning for what I would call a brighter future for all children. Now, the COVID-19 is, as was mentioned by Marie-Louise, taking a heavy toll on children. It risks depriving an even greater number of children from having a fair chance in life. Now, OECD analysis suggests that during the first half of 2020, students in the grades of 1 to 12, who were affected by school closures may have lost 1/3 of a school year of learning, but that this could reduce their lifetime income by about 3% and lower the GDP of their member countries by an average of 1.5% over the rest of the century. So you have one student, one child, and then you take the loss produced by the pandemic, and then you multiply it over the lifetime, and then you, of course, take all of the population that is affected in this particular way. It's just tremendous. The consequences go much beyond what one would imagine in the very short term. Now, many children in the OECD countries are also very vulnerable. They face daily hardships. They lack the opportunities. They lack the support they need to fulfill their potential, to be able to thrive. Prior to the crisis, 1 in 7 children, 1 in 7 across the OECD countries lived in poor households. This is in the OECD, which are supposed to be the better off countries in the world. And we still lack the data to fully assess the impact of the crisis on child poverty. But projection suggests significant rises, and you're talking about tens of millions, and throughout the world, hundreds of millions of children in particular. You know, you're talking about billions of people affected, but you're talking about hundreds of millions of children. And in particular, you're talking about the children in the developing countries. You're talking about in the emerging economies, where the structures for protection are less developed. But even, for example, in the United States, child poverty could increase by more than 1/3 by the end of 2020 compared to the pre-crisis levels. So even in the most developed countries, this phenomenon is happening. It is affecting the children. So countries around the world are making unprecedented efforts in response to the challenges of the COVID-19 crisis. In Europe, for example, we have witnessed an ambitious transformational vision for the recovery. It's the now very well-known Next Generation EU Recovery Plan, or the Green Deal, or the European Pillar of Social Rights. Children must continue to be placed front and center of all these efforts. They have to be front and center of the recovery efforts. Childhood is the most fundamental time in the development of individuals, and access to high quality early childhood and care cannot be overstated. It has an impact in everything that happens in the rest of the children's lives. The result of the OECD's International Early Learning and Child Wellbeing Study. It's a very long title, but well, it's not very sticky, but it says exactly what we mean. Early Learning and Child Wellbeing Study. It was released earlier this year, and it shows that children's social and emotional well-being is strongly linked to their cognitive development and to their overall sense of happiness. Moreover, the education that children receive during these early years is linked to their success when they become adults. So this includes academic, but also the labor market outcomes. So looking ahead, we need to focus on creating strong foundations for an economy of well-being, which supports children early in life, particularly those in situations of adversity or socioeconomic disadvantage. They need that support more. An economy of well-being is defined as, and I quote, the capacity to create a virtuous circle in which citizens' well-being drives economic prosperity, stability, and resilience, and vice versa. Those good macroeconomic outcomes allow to sustain well-being investments over time. So it feeds on each other, it reinforces each other. The OECD has a long and rich tradition of measuring well-being beyond GDP that goes back 50 years. Crucially, well-being has moved over time from being an interesting concept, something that maybe deserves to be analyzed, to now becoming a very well-established policy agenda. Our as is in the back of me here, our motto of the OECD is better policies for better lives. So the question of well-being has become central to the policy objectives, because better lives is about well-being. You can actually translate better lives. You could have had well-being instead of better lives in that phrase. So there are interesting links, and they're what I would call built-in links, inherent links between the well-being of children and a sustainable, inclusive recovery. And we at the OECD have taken concrete actions to strengthen the support to countries when promoting the well-being of children through these difficult times. We have started the groundwork on building effective policies for achieving children's well-being in the post-COVID recovery. In fact, just today, the OECD and the Institute for Inspiring Children's Futures published a paper introducing the basis of this work. So I recommend that you look for it and read it. In September, we created the OECD Center on Wellbeing, Inclusion, Sustainability, and Equal Opportunity, as was mentioned before, and I thank you for mentioning this. The WISE Center, again, WISE standing for Wellbeing, Inclusion, Sustainability, and Equal Opportunity. This is to put people's well-being, including children's well-being, at the top of the policy agenda. One of the units in the WISE Center is entirely devoted to work on child well-being. And I think that we have either Romina Boarini, the head of WISE, or Olivier Tibinson, who is the head of Child Wellbeing Unit at the WISE Center. Through this unit, we are supporting countries to be more forward-looking, to rapidly and sustainably implement their policy programs on child well-being. Now, taking this work forward, the OECD is also planning a major project that will not only assist countries in developing child well-being strategies, but it's also meant to provide a framework for better measurement of the benefits of investing in child well-being. Our objective is to make the case for why countries need to invest in children and to ensure that they receive consistent, coherent, coordinated support throughout their childhoods. It is promising to see that a number of governments are already taking a people-centered approach to policy design, to decision-making, and to delivery when it comes to protecting children. Countries such as Finland, we have the minister with us today, have recognized these specific needs of children and have made important progress towards setting national child well-being strategies. I applaud these efforts, and we hope to see more countries follow suit. So, dear friends, Marie-Louise, investing in children's potential now and for the future is a winning bet on sustainable and inclusive growth, on societal resilience, and it's a bet for stability. So let's make sure that this investment, that this bet features prominently in the post-COVID recovery. The OECD will continue to work with you and for you, and with all the stakeholders present today to champion children's well-being. I thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General Mr. Gurria, for your inspiring speech. We really need to pay attention that our children have opportunities and faith for the future, despite the situation that COVID-19 has created. Recovery requires investments, especially in children. So I'm Hanna Heinonen from the Central Union for Child Welfare Finland. It was founded in 1937. It's a central organization that works as an active and uniting force in matters relating to children's rights on a national and European level. At the moment, we have 98 NGOs as our members and 37 municipalities. Our main aims are to advocate for children's rights, child welfare, early childhood education, immigrant children, and the integrity of children. The most important goal for us is to promote the fulfillment of children's interests and rights in society through collaboration with international and national network and individual partners. At the moment, I'm really honored to introduce our next keynote speaker, Minister Krista Kiuru. In the middle of the social welfare and healthcare reform and COVID-19 situation, the Minister of Family Affairs and Social Services has considered it important to take part in the debate on the welfare and rights of the children. Minister Kiuru has also actively promoted the preparation of a national strategy for children in Finland. You're warmly welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope that you can hear me. So good morning all from Helsinki, and thank you for the kind introduction. As the Minister of Family Affairs and Social Services in Finland, I must say that today's topic is actually very dear to my heart. It is a great pleasure to be here with you today, and I would like to thank all for this chance to discuss more of the most pressing questions of our time. We are deeply appreciative of the important work carried out by Eurochild and OECD, as well as thankful to the numerous individuals and the organizations participating in it. In the middle of pandemic, it is all too easy to get caught in the needs and uncertainties of the moment. It has been a hard time, of course, but we need to find solutions also for the day-to-day struggle of containing the spread with the minimum manage to our economies and societies. However, this is also a time when we need roadmaps and strategies to orient ourselves to the future. And that is exactly what Eurochild and OECD are doing at the moment. So I would like to highlight the huge importance of the climate crisis as well as the COVID-19 pandemic for us all. I think it is vitally important that we work together to build up resilient, interconnected communities and societies in order to recover from this crisis and to lay the foundations for the future work. This far, Finland has been coping pretty well in the middle of COVID-19. And our results are relatively good compared to many other countries. But that makes us all the more aware of the deep impact of the pandemic on children. We know that children's well-being is at risk because of the restrictions that are needed to combat the pandemic. Children in many countries have had quite a deal to suffer and cope, and many countries have had to deal with many key areas of their daily lives, such as their schoolwork and friendships being suddenly moved online. Children are at the increased risk of violence, and their mental health can suffer due to the isolation caused by the pandemic. Most concerning are the effects on children who were already in disadvantaged or vulnerable situation, such as children belonging to minority groups or children with disabilities. As we know, the pandemic and the necessary restrictions also have serious economic impacts, and the resulting challenges for families and communities compound the risks to children. We must answer the challenges posed by the pandemic with a strong commitment to equality, inclusion, and well-being for all. Children and young people are at the center of this commitment to recovery, and they are deeply affected by the pandemic and by the measures taken in various countries. By investing in children's well-being, we are investing in equality, and we know that that is one of the most effective ways to increase well-being. It is well-known fact that investing in children is a very smart investment. And especially, as the General Secretary has noted, it makes good economic sense to support children in disadvantaged situations most of all. That's what we've been doing in Finland in all policies. Investing in children has far-reaching positive consequences in combating inequality over generations. In Finland, we are a rather pragmatic people in many respects. And thus, I firmly believe that we need to make investments in children an overarching principle in policy making. However, I believe it is not enough for us to consider this small investment as a matter of child and family policy. We cannot keep on thinking of child and family policies as a separate area of its own. Instead, we must commit to an economics of well-being that unites the whole society. And we must bring children and children's affairs to the heart of all policy making. We must realize that all policy making affects children both as individuals and as future citizens. And we must commit to policy and decision making that actually affirms that. Here I want to highlight two important policy areas where Finland is trying to make a change, trying to make a difference. One from my own Ministry of Social Affairs and Health, and one from our Ministry of Education and Culture. This first policy area consists health and social services, where we are ongoing a massive reform in how those services are organized. The goal is here to guarantee equal access to high quality health and social services to everyone in Finland. This actually means that we take a seriously children's mental problems, and we try to make a difference as soon as possible. We notice these problems starting, we try to make a difference so that children and young people will get quick and equal access to health and social services in 7 days. And these services will be done by the other school services we are providing in schools, so in local surroundings. The second policy area in education, so the second policy area is education, which is of course central to children's well-being. Here we are proposing for compulsory education to be extended to 18 years of age in order to raise Finland's level of education and competence. This would also reduce learning gaps and increase equality and non-discrimination in education. Both of these reforms should bring about significant investments in children and children's future. And I can guarantee that these are quite a big reforms in that sort of sense that they are widely discussed here in Finland. And we have been aiming to make such reforms already quite a due time. So in addition to considering children's well-being in specific policy issues, we must look at the big picture. An important tool in this work consists of both international and national strategies for children. As the chairperson of the parliamentary committee in charge of the Finnish child strategy, it is my deep belief that we must collaborate across the political spectrum and across borders, across disciplines, in order to produce well-being for all. This work raises important questions about the underpinnings of community and society, and I believe we are all the richer for seeking that common ground. The strategy work here in Finland is intertwined with our roadmap for recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. There is, of course, a lot that could be done.
Unfortunately, it appears that we've lost the connection there. I'm very sorry that that has happened. Minister was trying hard to get on to join us this morning. So we are indeed very grateful for her comments. And I think even though we didn't quite get to hear the end of the keynote speech, I think it has been set out very clearly what the challenges are for us, both to discuss today and of course for the future. So with that, I would like to thank very much both our keynote speakers and our co-host today for setting the scene for what I hope will be an extremely interesting conversation. We've seen many people following along on social media. The hashtag Putting Children First has got so many comments already, people really engaging with what is being said here today. So that is a very heartening sign. I'm going to move on now to the next stage of our session this morning, and that is our panel discussion. We have got some great speakers for you. So let me introduce them. We have staying with us, Her Excellency Marie-Louise Calero-Pecker, whom you've already heard from. But joining us now, we have Olivier Thévenon, head of the Child Wellbeing Unit, the WISE Centre, as was mentioned there by the Secretary General of the OECD. We also have Jennifer Davidson, Executive Director of the Institute for Inspiring Children's Futures at the University of Strathclyde. And I believe congratulations are in order, as Jennifer, you were recently awarded an OBE in recognition of your work on children's wellbeing. So very big congratulations and heartfelt thanks for us all for that. We also have joining us from Finland especially, Sanna Kolju, Senior Specialist at the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health. She's responsible for the preparations and implementations of the forthcoming National Child Strategy, and will be telling us a bit about that. We have then, finally, saving the best for last, we have our member of the Eurochild Children's Council, Eetu, who is the representative of Finland. So very, very welcome to all of you for joining us. Now, as well as hearing from our most excellent panelists, we are also interested in what you, the audience, think, to get a sense of what your thoughts are and to gauge the perception of what needs to be prioritized in the current investments and the investments in the near future. We have a poll question for you. So you should be able to see on your screens this question, which is, taking account of the current crisis, if you had to prioritize one public investment that will make the biggest difference to children's well-being and to build an economy of well-being, what would it be? You have multiple choice answers there. I will go through them one by one. Expanding early childhood education and care for all young children, improving the quality and inclusiveness of primary and secondary education, protecting household incomes with minimum income schemes, strengthening children's participation in the development, delivery and evaluation of services, or providing free high quality healthcare for all families and children. All of those things obviously are incredibly important, but we would like to get your sense of what you think is the most important. You can simply click on the button and then hit submit. While I allow you to do the voting, let me ask some of our panelists what they think about that question. Olivier, let me start with you. How would you have answered that particular question?
Thank you, Jennifer. Let me thank you also first, Eurochild, for setting up this webinar series, which are very timely. Difficult questions, actually, because basically it's hard to choose. And as I will tell a bit further in my talk today, what makes it very difficult to choose between these alternatives is that when you combine all this spending, you have some positive interaction that creates more benefits when you invest instead of only investing in one area. But if I have to choose, I will choose first providing healthcare as a basis, as a layout for making investment in child well-being. I note one thing perhaps that we should also consider is that which groups of children should we target? Some children are more vulnerable than others, so perhaps providing free access to all children is not the solution, but we should target support to the most vulnerable children. But this option was not provided in the menu of responses.
Well, it's just to take the temperature of the room. Sana, if you had to choose one, and I know it's difficult to choose one, which would it be?
Yeah, providing
Sana?
Providing free healthcare, I said.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Olivier. I have the same issue that I would definitely like to choose all of them and highlight the synergies there. But if I had to choose one, I would like to choose supporting household incomes through some sorts of minimum wage schemes or other methods, because decreasing child poverty is an important way to increase child participation and well-being. So I would like to pick that one if I had to choose only one.
I know it's difficult, but we like to challenge people. And in fact, I think we have about 70% of our attendees have voted now. So maybe we could see the results, and I will get our other panelists to reflect on the results. Okay, so it's very, very close indeed. It does appear to be that improving the quality and inclusiveness of education gets 25%, but then protecting household incomes very closely behind on 23%, providing free high quality healthcare 22%, and expanding early childhood education on 20%. So it seems that the last one, unfortunately, is strengthening children's participation in the development and delivery of services. Jennifer, are you surprised by those results, or were they what you expected?
I'm actually laughing because I think everyone is also saying these are really hard to choose between. How can we? So I think if anything, it tells us about the complexity of these issues and how interconnected they are. And yeah, and I think probably I would even add, we could all come up with 2 or 3 more. I would be saying protecting household incomes also requires a strong economy, and it requires a good safety net if we can't get a job, and all of that connected is so important. So yeah, I think we all agree that these are really tricky to choose between and all very important.
Yes, and Marie-Louise, do you feel the same conflict? As clearly our audience is very evenly split.
Well, I must say that we're all in agreement that it is so very difficult to choose actually from these 5 areas. But obviously now that I am asked to choose one, I would go for expanding early childhood education and care for all young children. And the reason is I perceive early childhood education and care as the foundation to all of these important parts of what I call the value chain. Let me take an analogous example. Well, good childhood education and care is like the need for strong foundations when building a house. If we do not put together the proper foundations to the development of a child, we will not be able to ensure that the child can be able to achieve its full potential during the whole process of one's life. We must remember that experts in the field describe early years, early childhood education and care is catalyst to the development of what they call the brain architecture. I usually also go even a step further than early childhood education and care. I also identify maternal health services as being fundamental to the development of the potential of a child. Maternal health services gives us the opportunity of looking at any potential vulnerability that the child could be born into. And therefore, it gives us the possibility of addressing those vulnerabilities at a very, very early stage in its life. Maybe I am the preventive one. I have this inbuilt of going for preventive measures and for solid foundations. But I'm afraid all the 5 of them are so very important. They are the guidelines for our short, medium, and long-term approach to really create and build an economy of well-being. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we can also hear now from Etu. Etu, did you vote in that poll, and what were your thoughts about it?
Yes, so I did vote for the expanding early childhood education and care for all young children. It is very important that we lay a structure, as Her Excellency Marie-Louise said, that we have a strong foundation before children go to school, and they can really communicate with each other and train their social skills in preschool and in early childhood care. In Finland, we have this two-year preschool. This I think it is a campaign, or I think the minister would know better, but yes, we are strongly supporting the children before they go to school, and we also accommodate them with one of the best preschool and school systems in the world. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that was one that was very strongly voted for by other members of the audience as well. So that's good to hear. Thank you. We will hear more from you shortly. I'm going to turn now over to hearing from each of our panelists. I've got some questions that we want them to get to grips with. So I will start with Olivier and Jennifer. The first to you, tell us why it's so important to have an economic perspective on child well-being. Perhaps Olivier first.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Yes. Let me first start by stressing that, of course, child well-being is a matter of right and justice. Children have right to decent life, and they have right to equal opportunities. And it involves that their life decision and their outcomes do not depend on where they are born or where they live and grow up. And clearly, equal opportunity is not the situation we are experiencing. Just let me take child poverty as an indicator of how unequal changes are. On average, before the pandemic onset, more than 1 in 7 children live in poverty across the OECD. And children make up of a quarter of the population in poverty. And of course, these conditions, these economic conditions are shaping life chances. 2 years ago, we produced a report on social mobility where it was shown that on average in the OECD, it will take children of poor families 5 generations to reach the average income in their country. So this is to set the scene. But there is some economic case for investing in children. And let me emphasize three key points that can be highlighted with an economic approach of child well-being. First one is that children and child well-being is a public good, which means that the well-being of children benefits the whole society, including childless people. One obvious example of these positive externalities, that the fact that it's a public good, it's obvious when we consider welfare state sustainability, for instance, in the future. Children of today are tomorrow's workers, and they are tomorrow's taxpayers and social contributors. They will pay for social welfare benefits. So there is collective interest in investing in children. The second point that is highlighted by the economic approach is that there are multiplier effects of investing in children. Two kinds of multiplier effects. One is that there is some dynamics in child development and in skill formation. There is a famous quotation of James Ekman that says skills begets skills. And that a few behavioral issues can be prevented if they are detected early. So there is, if you start to invest early in life, you can build on this early foundation to increase the human and social capital of children. The second multiplier effect is due to the positive interaction between physical health, between cognitive and non-cognitive development and child happiness that was already mentioned by Angel Gurria. This creates virtuous circle in child development. And the third aspect, and I stop there, that is really stressed by the economic approach, is that we have also to consider the safety costs that are involved when we are investing in children. When we are assessing the opportunity for policy intervention, it's important to take into account not only the effect that this intervention have on child outcomes, but we need also to take into account the consequences, which can be positive or negative, that would have been observed without policy intervention. Let me take just one example to illustrate this point, and I stop there. So there is a lot of debates about the opportunity to investing in childcare facilities. In the short term, it enables, for instance, women to participate in the labor market. It creates new jobs, it creates new tax revenues. But the key element is also the saved expenditures on unemployment benefits. And a few years ago, there was an evaluation in Australia about the opportunity to invest in childcare facilities. And they showed that the crucial element to have a positive benefit cost balance was due to this saved expenditures on unemployment benefits, which created a positive balance in the medium term in 5 to 7 years. And I will stop there.
Thank you, Olivier. And I just want to acknowledge that we had the minister there reconnecting, and thank you very much for that. Unfortunately, we didn't hear the end of the speech, but this event is being recorded and a report is being put together for afterwards. So we will get the full text of the keynote speeches there. So I do want to acknowledge once again, thank you from Finland, the minister, for joining us and for giving us her speech, even though it got cut sadly a little bit short at the end. But don't worry, we will get all the information to you after the fact. Jennifer, now let me move on to you for a question. What work is the OECD doing to support member state governments to assess where the investments in children should be prioritized? Could you build on that for me, please?
I'd be glad to. I think Olivier is probably a better place to talk about specifically the OECD and their work, but I'm really delighted that the Institute for Inspiring Children's Futures is in partnership with the OECD in establishing a new doctoral research center that is focused exactly on these issues. And we're doing this because we really recognize the importance of taking an economic approach to understanding children's well-being. And as a child rights advocate, I think it's really worth mentioning how sometimes this idea of having an economic perspective can really challenge child rights advocates because it has the risk of sounding like we're cheapening children or that we are somehow uncomfortable because we're seeing children as objects. And I think really to echo what Olivier had said before, that not only is poverty and inequality a rights and a justice issue, but actually even more than that, I think these are precursors to many other rights breaches that children experience when they're starting from such a difficult place. And so if we're not focusing on the environment that perpetuates these inequalities, then we're missing the trick. And so we have an opportunity to be working together with the WISE Center and in particular the Unit on Children's Wellbeing to develop a framework with them to be guiding countries' decisions about investment in children to make sure that there's the evidence and the data to inform much better decision making to ensure that we're investing in the right places and with the right decisions that will ultimately impact on children's well-being. I think there's still a long way to go to ensure that we have the data, both the data to inform what those decisions ought to be, the evidence that informs it, but also I think we have some really helpful beginning emerging perspectives to be thinking about the components of what those investments need to be and how governments might be able to develop their frameworks. And indeed, Mr. Gurria referred to a paper that we've jointly done very recently that helps to have countries develop their thinking further about 5 pillars related to that are essential really to build on a country's decision making about their investments related to well-being. The first, of course, being the importance of data. So I'll stop there.
Oh, thank you. As a follow-up question, Jennifer, then how can civil society and other stakeholders help in this endeavour?
So you would imagine that I would say they are essential. But in fact, the question I suspect is not so much how can civil society and other stakeholders, but actually how must they, and I think first off, not only are they essential, but they enlightened governments and enlightened civil servants and politicians recognize the importance of the engagement of all of government across all of the different agendas and portfolios on the issue of child well-being, but also the importance of engaging all of society in coming together, because this is a really messy, complex and challenging and interconnected problem to solve, or challenge for us to solve in relation to children's well-being. And so we need a whole range of actors who might be the sort of less typical actors who we need to stand up and be speaking about the importance of investments in children's well-being. And really to echo Mr. Gurria's comment about the feedback loop, and Olivier was speaking about the virtuous circle, we need to make sure that everyone is connecting in, including children and young people, to be giving us the feedback about whether the actual policies and the interventions are actually getting us to the outcomes we're all seeking. And so I would suggest that civil society is a fundamental part of that feedback loop. And I think our partnership and what Eurochild is developing here today and has a fantastic track record of doing is exactly that, is bringing together a range of actors and to be focusing on these issues in such an important way.
Thank you. Sanna, let me turn to you and ask, how did Finland go about developing its children's strategy? What do you think the impact will be? And how does it tie into the country's economic programme?
Thank you. Well, first of all, the Finnish children's strategy, or strategy for children, is well in progress, and we are hard at work on actually preparing the strategy itself. The work started already in 2018, and we are drawing on empirical data and knowledge about the situation in Finland. We are drawing on research and analysis, and we are drawing on human rights approaches. And we are trying to combine all that into a single document, which is being prepared by the parliamentary committee, which Madame Kiuru is the chairperson of. And I am part of the team that is supporting that committee by drawing together these streams of knowledge and trying to combine them into something that is effective and strategic, and that will actually help improve children's lives. And I think one key feature of the Finnish strategy for children is that it is being prepared by representatives of all the parties in our parliament. So the parliamentary committee does not only consist of people in the cabinet or the parties represented in our cabinet of ministers, but all the parties in our parliament. And I believe that is a key feature in making for an enduring strategy. So our plan is for the strategy to lay out the grand, enduring, long-lasting views on how to improve well-being. And then we expect each cabinet, each government to make its own implementation plan. So that first stage where we make the strategy itself will be finished by the end of this year. And then we face the thorny but also very exciting challenge of how to start implementing the strategy itself. As to what I would expect the impact to be, I think the key thing here is that we need to combine all the work that is being done into one cohesive whole. We need to have an overarching systematic way of realizing children's rights in Finland, because there's a huge amount of very important, excellent work being done by various government actors, especially by NGOs, which are hugely important in this work here, by many sectors, many actors. But since we have not had a strong overarching way of coordinating all that work, I worry that we may have gaps. We may have gaps. We may have children slip through the gaps of our social safety net. We may have some children, especially in vulnerable situations or disadvantaged situations, who are not getting the support they need, or who do not get to participate as they have the right to. And I feel that if all goes well, our strategy will do a great deal to provide for that kind of cohesive approach, systematic approach in supporting all children's rights. And of course, I think any strategy for children is fundamentally linked to economic development, because investing in children and investing in children's rights just makes good economic sense. So what we're currently doing is we're exploring avenues and ways of integrating the children's strategy and the implementation plan with the budget processes in Finland. So with the ways that the budget is allocated and followed up on. And what we currently need on that is we need more data on what share of the budget goes to children and families. And we need to follow up on how those budgetary allocations actually benefit, how they actually work, what the results actually are. So we need to focus on the data to follow up on the outcomes, so that we can actually know that which kinds of budgetary decisions would be the most beneficial and effective in implementing the strategy. And I think that is actually super exciting, because it ties into the economics of well-being. And we need to, I think, focus very much on that, both on children's rights impact assessment and on the budgetary processes. They may sound less exciting on the face of it, but I think they're hugely important in laying the foundation for children's rights in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sanna. Now, staying with Finland, I'd like to bring Eetu back in just to get his thoughts on how children are consulted in public policy. You know, Eetu, do tell us your experience and what you think about how children are consulted in Finland, at the EU level, in your city, and why that's so important, please.
Thank you. Yes, so in Finland, we have many different types of ways that children can be consulted in public policy making. For example, our government is preparing and adopting every 4 years a national youth work and policy program. We also have a youth committee, which is set yearly by our Finnish government. The role of the youth committee is to assess the impact of government measures on young people, make initiatives and proposals for the development of youth policy by the Finnish government, and also to provide up-to-date information on young people and their living conditions. Then in Finland, we have student councils in every school, which is regulated by law. So it is required by the law schools to set up a student council. There are different types of them, and then the things that the student councils get to influence into, they differ from schools to school. For example, in my school, the student council got to influence to our school's environment, and we have booked new furniture for our students. And then we want to keep the student councils as a low threshold, so that people can access it really easily. And we want to keep the environment in the student councils good, and they aren't that strict as some other ways that children can be listened. And then we have our Union of Youth Councils, which is the umbrella organization of all local youth councils in Finland. They are the lobbying organization of not only the Finnish youth councils, but also all of the youth in Finland. They help and provide trainings to all the members of the youth councils, and they have a really, I think it's a great campaign going on that which is named as all youth councils to the city's governments and committees. In this campaign, they try to promote the cities to give seats in the city councils for the youth councils and the youth of the city. And they also have some big aims that they try to get forward, which is one of them is to get legal voting age down to 16 years old. I personally think that would be a great idea, and some countries are good examples in that. For example, Brazil, Austria, and then Malta. And they're currently trying to put this this idea forward. And the best thing about some youth councils here in Finland is that some of them have representatives already in the city councils and committees, and they really get to influence into things that the city is preparing. And the representatives are a very important part of the youth council's city's planning processes and other major things. Such in my city, the youth council has been involved in planning of the tram network and many other interesting things as our plans, how we build playgrounds and other major investments. And the very interesting fact in Finland is that the status of the youth councils and committees is actually ensured by the law. That is, I think, maybe quite a new thing. I think I don't know, many countries don't have this kind of regulation by law. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it would be really important for all countries to have youth councils or some kind of plan how they can hear the voices of the youth and children. And I personally think it should be in the law so that they really would get heard, because otherwise we cannot ensure at any way that the children and youth can really be heard and their opinions get shouted out. And my own experience with influencing is a pretty wide-ranging one, from the Eurochild Children's Council to my local youth council. I've been the vice chairman of our children's council, and I've also been for 6 years now part of our student council in my school, and I'm currently running on election for our city's youth council's government, which is like the most important thing in there. So I've got so much experience from all of these things that I wouldn't change it to anything. And children and youth need to be heard in policy making and in decision making, since the decisions that politicians do today will affect us in around 10 to 20 years. It is also important to note that the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the UNCRC, holds that children have to be heard in public decision making. For example, the Article 12 of the UNCRC says that all the ratified states shall assure that all children that are able to say their opinions have a right to be heard in all matters affecting children's life. Unfortunately, this does not apply to all countries, neither in Europe, but in the world, which is a very, very, very unfortunate thing that we have here. And we have many different ways already in national, local, and European level that we can get children's voices heard, and also the youth. For example, at local level, we have the Children's and Youth Councils. On national level, we have the National Youth Parliaments. For example, in Wales and the UK, they have a great system how this can work. And I'm sure many countries could, or Wales and the UK could teach many countries for like adopting this system. And we have to make sure that every child and every youth, and regardless of their background, religion, or their personal disabilities, get their opinions heard, since everyone has the same rights, depending not depending on their background. And one example of this, a great example, is Greta Thunberg, who has gotten children's voices much more appreciated than never before. And this proves the fact that children and youth can sometimes be smarter than adults in some cases. This does not apply to all, but I personally think that adults can also make bad decisions if they don't listen to our opinions. And I call all politicians to remember to think from child perspective when they are making decisions that affect children and their lives, because adults might not know or remember what they would think if they would be a child. And as Minister Kiuru said in her statement, we have to invest in children's mental and physical health, protect children from exclusion, and ensure the easy access to healthcare services for youth and children. It is also important to note that we have to invest in education, child poverty, and exclusion. A good example, as Minister Kiuru said, is to extend the age of compulsory and free education higher, as in Finland we will have that now on age 18, and that way we could provide free and easy accessible learning after secondary and primary schools for all children and youth. This also will affect that matter that the youth can get more easier a job when they become adults, since not every child or youth person get even a master's degree, which is really, really unfortunate, and can be fixed by some new reforms of the systems, and also in the reform of the social and healthcare services here in Finland, children and youth have also get to give their opinions on the reform, which is a very important thing, and I really much appreciate that the ministers really have taken our views into account while doing this new reform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eto. We appreciate your input, and of course we will hear from your counterparts from Spain and from Bulgaria tomorrow morning and Friday morning. We are running very short of time, but I have time quickly to ask Marie-Louise to tell us just quickly about the childonomics model and how that will be part of government's plans to recover from the current crisis.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. I believe that our governments must not continue to think and plan in silos. Our governments and policymakers should think and plan on a long-term basis and also adopt a holistic approach in their work to break the cycles of disadvantage. There needs to be clear policies for national, regional, and global governance. All this can be achieved if Agenda 2030, with its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, is effectively taken on board and implemented, as it gives us the necessary framework and also guidelines. COVID-19 has brought a health emergency, which subsequently created a domino effect and a multitude of social and economic repercussions, compounding on the pre-COVID vulnerable and disadvantaged communities in our societies even further. Moreover, as the study in combating COVID-19's effect on children by OECD reports, the pandemic has the potential to create new vulnerable children, and countries must prepare to respond to growing needs for support. It is therefore all too clear that the pandemic has not only created a health emergency and an economic crisis, but definitely it is affecting all aspects of human life, with children as a vulnerable demographic, who are most affected. From our first-hand experience when engaging with children in conversation, we know that they are yearning for the right governing decisions and the right policies to be brought into being to fight off these effects that are pulling down their aspirations of well-being. Children are telling us that they want their rights to be safeguarded. Children are insisting that they want to participate fully on decisions that affect their very own lives now and in the future, as we have just heard Eto speaking about it. Pre-pandemic, we had already seen children's movements taking roots to demand a more equal and equitable global society. The pandemic is exacerbating the inequalities and the inequities. It is therefore crystal clear that focusing on economic recovery on its own will not take us far. The need to holistically strategize the economy and the needs of children and the wider society has never been so evident. The pandemic has brought to the fore the lack of resilience in many of our empowerment and protection processes and systems for children. The predominant inequalities, which have been further exacerbated by the pandemic, are subsequently compounding further and creating even more severe risks for children. If I had to take one particular aspect of the dreadful effects of the pandemic on children, I would choose the terrible situation of children falling out of the education system. Never before was the educational and digital divide so evident. And as the Director General of UNESCO said, the global scale and the speed of the current educational disruption is unparalleled, and if prolonged, could threaten the right to education. So this is one of the most horrible effects of COVID-19, and it is a very clear example of how the pandemic is actually threatening even children's rights. Eurochild, however, is an optimist. After much consultation and studies, we are perceiving the pandemic as a time for reflection, a time for thinking outside the box to develop the right strategies and policies so that we can ensure a holistic approach to the much needed sustainable development in all sectors. We are perceiving the pandemic as a learning curve whereby we must not ignore the lessons that are being learned. And in this sense, Eurochild has increased and is continuing to enhance its advocacy to reach out to governments and authorities so as to create more awareness of the need that economic strategies must be people-centered, putting children in particular at the heart of all recovery strategies and plans. We are advocating for economies that look ahead and assess social impact beforehand so that we can build a preventive approach, a preventive support system to sow the necessary seeds for resilience. And this is where our childonomics model comes in. When in 2014, Eurochild led this initiative of developing childonomics, no one ever knew that in a few years' time, the need for such a model would become so important. Childonomics is a project which now needs to go into a next stage, whereby the scientific toolkit needs to be further developed. Childonomics is basically a tool to determine the long-term social and economic return of investing in children, and specifically in various child empowerment and protection services. It is a tool that can predetermine the social impact of the economic investment. It provides a method which any available relevant data can be used to compare the social and economic investment and also evaluate the outcomes of the different existing or proposed services. It can be the tool that allows policymakers to make the necessary informed decisions about what works and what does not work. It can give the necessary landscape to policymakers to invest sustainably. It is definitely a transparent tool to help organizations and networks to strengthen their advocacy for the necessary changes to be made in strategies and policies to safeguard children's rights. It is a guarantee for children's well-being to be at the core of all policies. In brief, childonomics provides the evidence that investing in children is worth it. Childonomics can be the catalyst that provides the basis of long-term sustainable planning. Childonomics also provides the assurance of not throwing much precious resources down the drain, but ensures an approach to meaningful growth and inclusive prosperity. Childonomics is essentially an important tool towards an economy of well-being. Finally, I would like to take the opportunity to publicly encourage OECD to consolidate its partnership with Eurochild now on the development of this important tool. Childonomics is a game changer, and OECD understands the dire need for such a tool. So Eurochild and OECD are definitely on the same page in our belief for the importance of our policymakers to make well-being central in their work for better, equal, and equitable societies in the best interest of our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie-Louise. Now, you said Eurochild is an optimistic organization, so we've only got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to ask each of our panelists to tell me in just 3 words what they are optimistic about in this area. Jennifer, let me start with you. Can you keep it to just a few words to say what you're optimistic about?
COVID gives us an opportunity to be much more clinical in precisely defining what it means to put children at the heart of recovery.
Perfect, thank you. Sana, your thoughts?
I'm optimistic about children and young people becoming more involved, and in us recognizing better the need for them to have sufficient information for participation, because that is a key requirement to meaningfully participate. Thank you.
Thank you. A2, in 1 sentence, what are you optimistic and hopeful about?
Well, I hope that we learn new technical skills and ways to communicate during this pandemic.
Thank you. Olivier.
Yeah, very quickly. Yes, Finland is very well advanced in promoting a very comprehensive strategy, but I see a few other countries that are taking also this direction, so which leaves me very optimistic. And let me also mention again that the paper that we started to develop with the Institute for Inspiring Children's Future, if you Google in the OECD Child Wellbeing portal, you will see this paper, which tries to help countries develop comprehensive plans to enhance child wellbeing. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier. And I'm so sorry that time has run out so much and we didn't get to hear quite as much as we would have liked. I'm sure we could have discussed much longer. But I will turn now over to Hanna Heinonen, the Eurochild representative from Finland, and Marie-Louise Colero to close out with their final closing thoughts. Hanna, perhaps we could have you first with your final thoughts.
Thank you. It has been really interesting morning for all of us, I hope so. Very inspiring speeches and nice panel discussion as well as it can be here through the Zoom. Well, for us, I think that we are in a high risk that coronavirus or this COVID-19 situation crisis may lead to the growing inequality among children and young people. I think this COVID situation has effects on all children and young people. And it's our momentum where it's really important to put the children's need in the heart of policymaking. What is, of course, Eurochild has been doing together with the networks all the time. It's very important to realize that this is time to invest in children. It's time to do everything that inequalities don't grow. For this reason, for example, the child guarantee plays a very important role, and we need to see that. In Finland, it's also widely recognized that basic services play an extremely important role in strengthening equality between children and families. As you have heard from Eetu, early childhood education, or all our basic services, they are in a key role when tackling this inequality. The child impact assessment must be a part of the decision-making processes, and it's also important to make sure that children and young people are being heard and that they have access to information and support in a way that is suitable for them. So we really need to strengthen child participation. And this all because children are the most important things we have, and that is why we need to work hard to ensure that the rights of the child are widely realized. Thank you for this very inspiring and interesting webinar.
Thank you, Hanna. Marie-Louise, you've covered a lot of ground for us already, but could I ask you just for a final remark?
Yes, thank you once again, Jennifer. And as I said before, Eurochild is an optimist. So we believe that despite all the challenges we face with the pandemic, Europe has also a unique opportunity. Europe has the necessary resources and the ability to press the reset button. We have an opportunity to make the right and the smart choices for our future socio-economic development. We must design our choices according to where we, as a European society, want to be in 10, 20 years' time. Eurochild believes that investing in children is an essential foundation to build inclusive prosperity and sustainable peace for the future. We believe in safeguarding children's rights and empowering children to be effective rights holders and acknowledged, valued contributors in our societies. We are also optimistic that the European Union will lead the way in supporting the right choices. And next week, we expect the EU institutions to decide on the next 7-year budget. We are calling on governments of member states to support the European Commission and the European Parliament in their proposal to ring-fence 5% of the European Social Fund Plus for the purpose of introducing and implementing the child guarantee. The EU has also decided to inject 672.5 billion euros into Europe's recovery through the Recovery and Resilience Facility. We welcome the call by the European Parliament for 7% of these resources to be ring-fenced for children and youth. We subscribe to the words of one of the most eminent members of the European Parliament when it was said or stated, how can we call this a next generation EU initiative without actually prioritizing investment in children and young people directly? Children are Europe's greatest resource. On behalf of Eurochild, I urge all governments to invest wisely in children so that we will reap the desired benefits for the generations yet to come. If children are ignored, then we and future generations will pay a hefty price. An economy of well-being is first and foremost an economy that invests in its children. We look forward to working together to build a better future for every child in Europe. Before we finally close this webinar, I would like to remind us all that today, the 18th of November, is also an important day. It is the day when across Europe, we draw the attention to the urgency of ending child sexual abuse. This is a Council of Europe Observance Day. I would like to take this opportunity to convey a special acknowledgement to our friends and allies at the Council of Europe, who we are pleased to welcome their representative at our Friday's webinar. The theme for this year's Observance Day specifically focuses on preventing risky behavior by children, child self-generated sexual images and/or videos. And finally, I would like to thank all of our eminent speakers, in particular His Excellency Angel Gurria and the Honorable Minister Curia, and each and every one of you for making this webinar an exceptionally constructive and informative event. And last but not least, our eminent panelists, Batu Hanna and the Central Union for Child Welfare of Finland. Thank you all so very much for being with us to this event.
Thank you, Mary-Louise. You've performed my job for me. I was just going to thank all of our panelists again. I would like also to thank the audience, many hundreds following on live stream and via the platform. You sending in many comments using that hashtag, putting children first, lots of thoughts and reflections. So we're delighted to see that. We didn't get to many of your questions, but that's because time does get so tight and there is so much to discuss. But it's not over, because you can join us for the webinars tomorrow morning and on Friday morning at the same time. Tomorrow we'll be focusing on child poverty, so do join us then, and don't forget you can send in your questions in advance of our discussion. We'll try to collect as many of those as well for the reports, and the events are being recorded, so there will be plenty of opportunities to be engaged. Thank you once again, everyone, and of course Eurochild for organizing